My project as a visiting scholar here is sort of twofold. I'm researching how people make meaning, how people read new media scholarship, and then eventually we'll translate that into how we're teaching students to read it, which is kind of backwards, I know, but it should be the other way around given that we're composition teachers. But my research agenda for the next couple of years is figuring out how to make online journals like Kairos and the work that we publish in Kairos, which is multi-mediated scholarship, how to make that valuable by tenure and promotion stakeholders, valued by them. So that's the first part of my project, is to sort of interview DMAC participants to show them a text, an example text, and have them talk through how they're making meaning out of that text. So the second project that I'm working on is sort of the more it's the one that I knew I could accomplish in the week and a half here. I have my tenure binder as a tenure track faculty member has always been in this big blue paper-filled binder, and yet most of my work is digital and can't be printed. You can't print a movie, for instance. So I remediated my binder this past year to put it in a blog format so that people could access my scholarship more readily and see the narratives that you have to write to accompany those artifacts. But the navigation was all wonky, and I don't like the consecutiveness of the way that the blog functions, and so I'm moving all of that information over to a better content management system. And I'm in the process of figuring out which one's going to be the best for me and which one's sort of like Joomla or Drupal and how those things work, because I've never used one before, not as a backend, not as an administrator. And so I'm here to sort of figure out the technical how-to, but also the larger issue of whether I can host, what even to call this thing, right? I mean, on a most basic level, it's no longer a binder. What is it? Is it a tenure hypertext? And if I call it that, who's going to freak out? What stakeholders are going to, whether, and then on another level, whether to host it on my new institution's server, to have that that domain as the branding for this new narrative, whatever I'm going to call it, or whether to host it offline on my own domain, and then have it be more public in that way. And how are tenure administrators, tenure stakeholders higher up than outside of the department going to view that, whether it's super public and commentable, by anybody and not just these standard, outside reviewers, or whether it needs to be within the domain of the university for some reason. I plead the fifth. No, I've been thinking about this a lot this week because these questions come up all the time, right? And what I've realized is that even though I used to use new media all the time, and always as an adjective, so I would always talk about new media texts, because that is what my interest is in. And I think there's a distinction between texts and new media technologies, how we get to the textual product. And I was pretty adamant that that was what I was always going to use and had defended that on different levels. But in the last year or so, I've noticed myself shifting more to using whatever term my audience is expecting, or whatever they're more familiar with. So I'll use multimodal or multimedia or digital writing studies. I haven't really used digital media a lot. That term doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, actually. I mean, I guess media is digital, but I don't know. I don't think of it that way. Because I think of analog media too. So it kind of depends. I mean, I use whichever term I think people are going to already understand in the context. But for my own research, I will stick with new media, and for the foreseeable future, will always. And to justify that, I think my own reasoning is that new media is just like postmodern. That's the way I equate it. You know, there's postmodern, there's postmodern, like there's post-process and all that stuff. And so in 5 years, there's going to be something else. There's going to be post-new media. And that's okay, because I'm more interested in new media as it's a representation of this moment in time and not as a thing. And so I'm more interested in that and how new media is being used by 7, 8, 9, 10 other different fields, and what are the intersections that we can pull all together between those fields, and with new media at the center of that. For me in particular, I have to go in the first day and say, yes, this is an English class, and no, we're not going to be writing 20-page research papers. Here are the kinds of things that we're going to be doing in this class, like video documentaries and multimedia texts, those kinds of things. And funny enough, actually, I use the term multimedia when I'm talking to my students, not new media, although I do get into discussion of that with them. But then I explain how a video documentary is like a 20-page research paper, but with different media involved, with more media involved, and how they're going to be doing 4 times as much work as they might have thought they would be doing with a 20-page research paper. So that's what they need to know. That's what students need to know about me, is that they're getting into this whole other world of composition that involves them thinking critically in several modes of communication at once, and how those modes interact. For other people in the field, teachers, scholars, whatever, who might be interested in my research, up until this point, and I think continuing, the thread has been, how do we read? How do we make sense out of whatever this is that we call a new media text? That's pretty basic. You know, it's like, how do we read it? But then that's been translating in the last year into the scholarly focus of that study. I wanted to come to DMAC before I knew that I was switching institutions. And for me, it wasn't a matter of having to convince anybody at my home institution that multimedia composition was a good thing. I'm not involved with the writing program administration, either at the school that I was at or at the new school, which is fine, because there's other people better qualified to do that than me. But they also already know that multimedia composition is a useful thing to do in classroom and in research. So for me, it was a personal matter that I had been involved in past iterations of this workshop, and the one thing that I always took away after working my ass off for 2 weeks was that the people here, the people who come to the DMAC workshop, are wonderful, wonderful people. They want to learn. They want to be involved. They have this energy. I mean, it's almost like, this is going to be a bad comparison, but emotionally it's a similar comparison. I love teaching freshman comp because the energy that freshmen have, that they bring, this sort of wide-eyed enthusiasm to the classroom, is similar to the enthusiasm that DMAC participants bring. And it had been a couple years since I'd been to the workshop, and I wanted to make sure that I kept in touch with that kind of energy. Because, too, I don't have to make arguments for multimedia composition at my schools. And I know that that's a very unique and unusual position to be in. And I want to remember, and I want to be reminded that everybody else in the world has to still make those arguments. And I want to know how they're attempting to do it so that I can remember when I'm working on my own work. My main piece of advice, I think, to people who are wanting to do digital media composition stuff at their home institutions is it's sort of this flower, really. I mean, there's a lot of petals that are involved here, and it won't happen overnight, just like a flower won't grow overnight. you can't do it alone. You have to figure out who your support systems are back at your university, which sometimes takes a year or two, or in some cases 3 years. So don't give up, because eventually you'll be able to figure out how to make it work in a way that works both for you and for the institution. And I think fourth, don't reinvent. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. That there are people who have already gone through this, who have proposals written, they have documentation, they have visions and brainstorms and ideas already written out, already composed, that you can draw on, that will help you make the arguments that you need at your institutions. It's just a matter of building your network, which I think DMAC is exactly what where you're building your network starts. I'm Cheryl Ball, and I'm here for the DMAC workshop. I'm a visiting scholar. That's totally wrong. I gotta do it again. One more time. My name is Cheryl Ball, and I'm a visiting scholar here at the DMAC workshop.